So the first thing people should know is that even in peacetime prior to this invasion, 80% of people, 75 to 80% of people in Russia get their information exclusively from television. Exclusively from television, right? 80%. And that is basically about the number of people that are supportive of Vladimir Putin, even if they're not necessarily supportive of this invasion, right? So all the people that supported this in the first place get all their information from television, right? And the dissidents and the people who are questioning things, they still have access to the internet. But in terms of radio, television, newspapers, every single independent media outlet in Russia has been shut down. There is no independent television. There's no independent radio. There's no independent newspapers in Russia at all. At all. Not even a little bit, right? So the ability to sell anything as a win is very, very strong. In terms of communication, there is this thing that we sort of in the West think, well, we gave this statement that this is how things are going to be, and we're going to be held against that. We're going to be held to that word, and people are going to look at, did we achieve our objectives or not? It's very different in Russia. So give you an example. In 2014, when Vladimir Putin said, those soldiers that showed up in Crimea that have no insignia and that are impossible to identify, these are not Russian soldiers. These are not, and he denied it for several days in a row. And then, of course, later he admitted it and gave out medals. Now, imagine if Boris Johnson had British troops somewhere, claimed they were not British troops, and then eventually acknowledged that they had been and gave out medals. I think there would be quite a reaction. I've documented over time, and I'm sure you have as well, the level of media misrepresentation and the outright lies we have seen over the last 6 years now, particularly. It was happening before, but not on quite the same scale. And so I don't really blame people for looking at a mainstream media which lied to them about Brexit, which lied to them about Trump, which lied to them about COVID, which lied to them about vaccines, which lied to them about almost everything. At least that's how they would experience it. Now that same media is unanimously in favor of certain things on Ukraine. And they're going, well, they've lied to me about all those other things. How can I really trust this? My difficulty with that is I know this situation from the inside. So when you had people running around saying Ukraine is overrun by Nazis, I was like, I'm a Jewish Russian guy who goes to Ukraine 3 times a year. And every bloody time I get on a plane, do you know who it is? It's me and 299 Orthodox Jews who are on a pilgrimage to Uman in Ukraine, right? In full garb. So if this was a country overrun by Nazis, I don't know how far they'd make it. Some people's brains have been broken by the last 6 years. And I think locking people in their homes for 2 years or close to 2 years hasn't helped. I think the collapse of the credibility and trust in the mainstream media is obviously a big factor here. People are like, well, we need to rebuild trust in the mainstream media. It's like, well, no. They need to become trustworthy first. Yeah. Then we can rebuild trust. So I don't really have any answers beyond what I'm trying to do, which is to give people what I think is a factual and accurate perspective. I've spent a lot of time monitoring what the Russian media are saying, what is coming out of Russia. And one of the things that's really bothered me, particularly in the last few weeks, has been not so much in the last few weeks, but in the first few weeks of the conflict, when people were scrapping around and looking for the right narrative to latch themselves onto, was how predictable it was. I'd watch something on Russian propaganda TV, and then a week later, I would start to see that popping up on Twitter from the people who don't themselves watch Russia TV, but those ideas are somehow being laundered through and are popping up a week later in Western discourse. Look, the far left hates the West and always have. And so they perceive any enemy of the West as a friend to them. They have always got into bed with foreign dictators. I mean, George Galloway is a good example of this, right? And so they will continue to do this. And to them, this is the perfect opportunity, right? Finally, someone is coming. And by the way, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is openly saying now that the point of what they're doing in Ukraine is to push America out of Europe, is to push America out of this idea of American domination, is to end American dominance around the world, which sits very nicely with the views of the far left and the West, as you well know, right? The West is the evil Satan who is oppressing everybody everywhere. And it is our job on the far left to prevent that from happening. It's only really out of the Western countries, only really in America where there's any sort of genuinely significant portion of the population who believe that this is the West's fault or anything like that. In Britain, those numbers are actually very small. And I think in America, there's a long-running and perfectly respectable, by the way, isolationist position. But I think the reason it's not being articulated in that way is that in our modern society, it's become sort of uncouth and impolite to say, I don't care people are being killed and raped and whatever, massacred. We should stay out of all foreign wars. That is no longer acceptable to say in polite society. So you have to make up stuff about Nazis and biolabs and whatever other nonsense that's being peddled at the moment. However, if your broad worldview is you are an isolationist who believes in keeping America out of foreign wars, well, this is just another thing that's come along, and now you're being asked to get embroiled in yet another thing, and you don't know much about it. You could be 20 years old, born after 9/11. You could be 25 years old, have no memory of 9/11. You certainly don't remember the Soviet Union. You certainly don't remember the propaganda that was coming out of the Soviet Union, as you and I do well. Mm. And so all of this is a new thing, and you're coming at it from a perspective of, as we just talked about, everything you're being told is untrue. And now on YouTube, as we've seen over the last 6 years, there's some genuine actual information that here's a guy giving you a lecture about why this is all your fault. And that appeals. I think we're all gradually over time going to get wake-up calls of one kind or another, which will hopefully reorientate those of us who are able to still be sensible back towards that kind of, do I know about this, or am I just being oppositional for the sake of being oppositional here? So that's on an individual level. I would say, look around and go like, is it just one conspiracy you now believe, or do you believe all of them? Because if you believe all of them, you've probably gone a bit too far. So that's the individual level. Structurally, how this gets solved, Brendan, that is $1 trillion question. Social media is going to be a huge part of it. Mainstream media. Look, what the mainstream media have to do, and this is easier said than done, is they've got to get back to honest reporting, right? They got to start treating people of all races, all sexes, all orientations as the same. They've got to stop blaming white people for things that happened 400 years ago and attempting to pin the blame for that onto people who are born now. They've got to have a reasonable approach to people from different sides of the political spectrum. And when someone is on the right, they should be treated just the same as they are on the left. Men and women should be treated equally. All of these things need to be brought back into some kind of semblance of sanity. That is how you begin to recapture I think people's trust, but it's going to be a hell of a long process. And whoever, by the way, cracks that technical problem is going to be a trillionaire.